All right, so here we are. We're talking with Jennifer Downing at Leadership South Coast, and this video here is about positive leadership. We've been talking about talent to strength, but through the course of our conversations, I suggested and requested to have some dialogue around positive leadership because Jennifer's program is going to be launching it for the first time, and so I thought that we could every month have a call where we talk about where you're at with positive leadership and some of the questions you have, which I'm sure are questions that anybody would have. So the purpose of these videos is really to help people with the actual implementation of positive leadership, combined with me kind of giving some commentary on the concepts and ways you could use the tools. So what I hope is when people watch this, they hear some ideas that work for them or might spark ideas that they could bring their own little flavor into it, because that's really how this works best is tailoring it to your style and your participants. So I really appreciate you being here and doing this, Jennifer. I'm really excited to see where this goes. Any thoughts before we kind of get started?
No, I mean, I'm very much still in the learning curve here. So I appreciate the opportunity to kind of hear again all of I'm familiar with it at this point, but hearing the key concepts again and suggestions from you on how we can actually implement this is very helpful. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I think what I want to do is maybe update people who are watching this, because you and I already had a conversation about this. That's what kind of started us talking about talent to strength and all of this. So it's not so we already did have a little bit of a conversation to kind of formulate your approach to this opening retreat. Your retreat is January 14th?
14th and 15th.
Yeah. So could you update people a little bit on your current thinking on how you're approaching this with the retreat and all of that?
Yeah. So the way that our sessions, so we have 9 active sessions. Our 10th month is our graduation month. So it lined up really nicely with the chapters in positive leadership. But I think for our program, it was best for me to introduce to have our participants read the introductory chapter before we come together for our orientation. So that's what I've done. I've circulated the introductory chapter to the group by email. Basically said this is an exciting new framework we're launching this year to help us strengthen our community leadership skills. And then, so we're hoping folks are going to read that before we come together. And then during the orientation, we'll have a discussion, just going back and kind of talking about what they read. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to integrate some group activity and discussion to drill down and hone those concepts from the introduction chapter. And then I think we'll follow the same format as we move through the book. So each month we'll go to the next competency, and then they'll hopefully come to each session prepared to discuss the skill, and then we will again drill it down with some kind of activity.
Right.
It's sort of the format I'm envisioning.
Yeah, really good. And I just want to point out too, for people listening, that some programs, they don't have people read anything ahead of the your retreat. They will introduce StrengthsFinder at the retreat. So that's
leadership.
I'm sorry. Yes, positive leadership. What did I say?
You said StrengthsFinder.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So
keep it clear where we're at.
No, thanks. Yeah. So I meant positive leadership, and so what they might do at the retreat is just do a little activity. And we have a couple that we offer. One is this idea of doing skits, and people will have read about that in the implementation guide. And then another is similar to skits. It's breaking the groups up into 7 groups and giving them an object, each object that would kind of be associated with one of the capacities. So for authenticity, it might be a mirror. And for resilience, it might be a first aid kit. Reason might be a magnifying glass. So, then those groups would talk about how that object relates to leadership. They don't even know about the positive leadership framework yet. So it's just a kind of way to ease them in. But I like the idea of just giving them the reading right up front and then discussing it. I'll be interested to hear how that goes, because, you know, why not get them started right away with this, and if possible. So, you know, it's just some people would rather start with like dipping the toe in the water, and some people would rather just, let's give them the content, let's get going. So what I thought in this call is I would talk a little bit about some of the key concepts in that introduction chapter, because that chapter is, in my mind, the most important. And the reason I emphasize that is because I think a lot of people think, and this is true with most books, is the introduction is just kind of like giving a general kind of overview of things. It's not that important, and the real meat comes later. But in positive leadership, that introduction chapter is some of the most important meat. I'm a vegetarian, so using that word is funny for me, but it's the real crux of the whole book. And what I mean by that specifically is some people think that the capacities are what positive leadership's all about. The capacities are more like attachments. You know, almost think, I don't know why I'm thinking of it like this, but you know, when you get a really deluxe vacuum cleaner, you know, you get one of those Dyson vacuum cleaners or one of those, you know, and it has all those like little attachments, like this one's for getting into the corners, and this one's has the brush and you can use it on your upholstery. The capacities are more like the attachments, and that introduction is like the main vacuum cleaner. You know, it's the engine, the motor, and the, you know, all of that technology that goes into it, and then the capacities sort of rest on top of it. You know, and they're very important, and they amplify the concepts of the foundation or the introduction chapter. So they're really important. I'm not dismissing them, but some of those concepts are really important in the introduction chapter, and I want those to be reverberated throughout the program. So when you do talk about the capacities, you might come back and talk about social force, or when you're talking about you know, resilience, you might come back and talk about an operator of resilience versus a technician, which is, you know, of resilience. So, you know, and then those ideas of operator versus technician and social force, those are in the introduction chapter. So I thought we could talk a little bit about that. I'll do a little screen share and pull up a PowerPoint where I sort of have some of my thoughts crystallized. So let me just do the screen share here. And the first thing I want to do is show people where to go. So when you go to the Positive Leadership website, down here in the left, it shows you where you can log in, you know, with your account. And so if you're a subscriber to the Positive Leadership Framework, you'll have a login. So you hit the login and enter your credentials, and then you know, once you're logged in, you want to go to resources up here, and this will take you to the resource library, which is where I'm at now. So you're in the resource library, and you see that there's the curriculum agreement and implementation guide. Definitely recommend reading that implementation guide. That'll be in here when you click on it. Then you have the positive leadership chapters, and whenever we do any updates, they're updated in here. So then there's the PowerPoints, and then we go by each chapter. So if we click on the introduction, what you'll see in here are several things. You'll see the chapter, again, is here. So the chapters are in two places. And then the PowerPoint, which you could download and edit. And I do recommend you edit it, because my purpose for the PowerPoint is a little different than your purpose will be. My purpose for the PowerPoint is I wanted to just make it as if I was presenting the chapter to somebody who never read it. And Jennifer, the other day, I don't know if you had a chance to look at them, but I sent you some sample PowerPoints that one of the programs created.
I did see those.
Yeah. And so what she did with that is she made her PowerPoints to reflect her experience with positive leadership. So she would focus on some of the key points that resonated for her. And then she would do some of the activities from the field guide, or she would do one activity from the field guide and show her results. So show her answers to the questions or her responses when she went through the activity. And then, you know, share that with the class and the benefit that she got from it, or, you know, the lessons she drew from it. So she really uses herself as a case study for her journey going through positive leadership. And then she'll add a couple of the little features that she thinks is interesting, and then just have the class talk about it. And I really, really like that approach because she's made it her own. So she'll facilitate it better because it's her own. And I don't expect anybody to facilitate it the way I would facilitate it. So I really like that. And I'd love for you to look at those. And one of my hopes too, Jennifer, if you're up for the challenge, is that you would make your own version of those PowerPoints.
Mm-hmm.
So then we could share those with people.
Sure.
So,
good idea.
All right. Then we have a summary of the chapter. And this summary is a 2-page summary. It's really not meant for your participants, because if you start giving them the 2-page summaries, they won't read the chapters. They'll wait for those. But what those are for is for guest speakers, or, to refresh yourself on some of the concepts without reading the whole chapter again. But, for guest speakers, you don't want to ask them to read a whole chapter in the time. So that might give the sense. Then just to show you down here is some other resources. Like I'll add articles that I think might touch on some of the key concepts in the chapters. Mm-hmm. So you could click on any of those if you want to send them out. A lot of programs will find their own articles and share those. Encourage that. Would love it if you found your own things that you're sharing. Send them my way and I can add them in here for other people. Mm-hmm. That goes for everybody watching this. If you have resources, if you send them in, then we can share them, and then kind of have this whole network of great resources. And then I have links to some videos that I think are really good for introducing it. So a lot of people have seen this first one of this guy dancing at a music festival. It's used a lot in leadership, but I think it's a really good example of not only leadership, but the social force view of leadership. But if you wanted to show people something that they probably haven't seen, here's a little video. It's basically a trailer for an Indian movie, a Bollywood movie. And but the little plot within this trailer really exemplifies social force and can make for some good discussion about what is social force and leadership, and do you need to have authority in order to be a leader. This article is this is a TED Talk. It's a little longer and goes into maybe more about a civic understanding of how power works, and I think some of the things he touches on really reflect social force. Mm-hmm. And then I added this too. This is a little example of the actress Ellen Page, and she has this very kind of moving personal experience of it's about her sexuality and coming out. And so I thought this touched on a lot. Like I almost saw every capacity. I see the social forces in there, the introduction concepts are in there, but then I see a lot of the authenticity and purpose and resilience and advocacy. And so, that's kind of a, and it's a very progressive kind of topic. So in more conservative communities, that may not be something that you want to show. But those are just some examples of some resources. And my hope is to always be growing that resource library. Anyway, so I want to introduce people to that. So then I wanted, all of that was to segue into opening up the PowerPoint for the introduction. So any thoughts or questions on any of that, Jennifer?
No.
Okay.
Not so far. I am planning to use one of those videos since people will be reading the chapter before they come. I think we talked about it being a kind of a nice way to get started is to show a video and then move into the presentation.
Right. I think so too. I think it just kind of primes the pump. And maybe if you wanted to pose some questions and then show the video, that might also prime the pump a little bit more. So good, very good. And so as I go through this stuff here, feel free to interrupt, pose a question or anything like that. My idea here is, again, not that you would show this PowerPoint.
Right.
This is my discussion of some of those concepts I consider important. I'm going to go through really fast. So the idea here is it's on video, and you can pause and rewind for anybody who's like, wait, how did that go? What did he say? So with that, let's make it bigger and so people can see. All right. So just the general introduction first is I have this little model that ties everything together. My goal is to kind of turn this into a infographic that maybe you could print off and blow up and have on a poster board if you wanted to, and have it as a visual display, because it kind of brings together, you know, all the pieces. The first are the three main pieces of self, community, which, yeah, it's down here, so it's blocked out when I make it bigger. So self, leadership, and then the bridge between the self and the community is leadership. So, and then these little kind of like, you know, arrows. This is like social force that kind of is you know, all throughout this. It interweaves these three pieces together: the self and the community and leadership. And a lot of what I mean by leadership is this idea of social force.
Right.
Then I have these 7 capacities, and there's a sort of an icon for each capacity, and you see these in the chapters. And I worked with a graphic designer to kind of add a more visual element to the book, and you know, so that's that piece. So with the introduction, you know, one of the things to start a conversation would be, what is leadership? Like, how would you define leadership? Because I think when you know, everybody kind of knows what leadership is. It's so pervasive in our culture, and you know, organizations are always talking about being a leader, and you know, even in college, and then even now in high school, there's so much about leadership. But what's really been interesting to me in my journey is that when you start to really, like, you know, look behind the curtain of what leadership is, there's not a lot of clarity there. It's a very vague notion, a very vague concept. So I like to, you know, try to get that out on the table early on, because you're going to have people coming into your program that they are like, I'm a leadership expert. I know everything about leadership. You can't teach me about leadership. That's what you're talking about isn't what I read in my books on leadership. And I don't know what it is. It's like people say, don't talk about religion, sex, or politics in public, because people will argue. But I would add, don't talk about leadership in public. Because, you know, sometimes they just get so opinionated about it. And so it can be really tricky. And that's why when I talk about leadership, I tell people, look, you know, I'm giving you an idea fashion show, and you're free to accept, reject, or adapt anything I say. I'm not here to tell you how leadership is, because you know, it's a lot like any of those other things, politics and religion and all that. You know, let's have a discourse. Let's have some exchange of ideas. But you're never going to tell somebody how it is. And I don't want you guys putting yourself in the position of like setting that up where you get that participant who just, you know, they're disruptive about it even. I've seen that happen in programs. And to confess, I'm sometimes that person. So not now anymore, I've learned. But younger Adam, he was that disruptive person. So, but I do think it's important to kind of open up that exchange of ideas, but open it with that idea of, look, you know, minds are like umbrellas. They only work when they're open. I'm just asking you to be open and entertain these ideas. And after our program is over, you're free to go and use what was valuable or go back to what you think or whatever. I don't know. So I think that's an important part, so that this way you can have a productive discussion, because it only takes like 1 or 2
right,
cantankerous participants to sort of like really impede the flow. And I think you need to address those people early on. That's just my tip for any program, is when you have that obstinance in the room, you don't need to address it publicly, but I would address it privately. I would say, hey, look, I think you have a learning style that where this may not work for you, but I really can't have that learning style interrupting the whole program. So we need to decide if like this is going to be a good fit for you. If you can participate productively, then awesome. And I encourage questions, and I'm not trying to shut you down in any way, shape, or form, but I just don't want to have a debate every time, we have a discussion about leadership. I want it to be a dialogue. And can you participate in a dialogue? And I know that that's going to be very awkward for some people to have that conversation, but I really do believe that, if you kind of leave something go unchecked, and then you get a sort of culture created where people don't feel comfortable sharing ideas because they have to deal with somebody who's king of the hill or queen of the hill. And anyway, I just want to stop. I'm going on longer than I ever planned to talk about that, but any thoughts on that?
Well, I was just thinking about one thing that I always do when I facilitate a meeting, not a full day meeting with our program, is you set ground rules right away early in the program. And it's something we will do in our orientation. The very beginning, before we even go into positive leadership or what the program structure is, you set ground rules and you actually allow the group to create those ground rules. So everybody's buying in and everybody's agreeing upon. And usually when people create these lists, the idea of respect and having an open mind, it always surfaces as one of the key ground rules. So I think you can establish that in the beginning to help for your whole program diffuse any kind of situation like that.
That's great. Good. And I agree with that. I think that's great. And there's some ground rule models out there on the internet. If you typed in establishing ground rules for working with groups or something like that, you'll find different templates already. Or you could have it, like you said, where it's group created. And great. I think that's so important. Good. So let's keep moving forward here. I know that leadership, so when we talk about what leadership is, I know it's something we consider to be quite valuable because of how much we talk about it, how many articles and books. It's also something we believe is necessary for communities, for organizations, and it's something that's hard to define. And so I really this is one of my favorite quotes on leadership because this is so true. Leadership is one of the most observed and least understood phenomena on earth. And this is a guy who made it his life study leadership, James McGregor Burns. And so I just think that that's a nice way to condition the conversation and to emphasize that point that, we observe it, we talk about it, but we don't really understand it. And if he says that, then I think anybody else should probably fall in the same category because, So, some questions I ask, is leadership a trait? Because there's a lot of theories around trait, leadership as a trait, a quality. And then some people will try to define what that trait is, and people will ask questions like, are you born with that trait, or can you acquire that trait? And so that occupies a lot of the discussion on leadership. So if somebody isn't born with that trait, does that mean or they haven't developed the trait, does that mean they're never a leader? Or if someone does have that trait or has acquired that trait, are they always the leader? I don't, just some questions. A lot of conversation too is around leadership as a role or a position or a title. And so does that mean whenever someone holds that role that they're always the leader? And if someone doesn't have that role or title or status, does that mean they're never the leader? And, just some discussion questions. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to dislodge this idea of leadership from being a trait and from being a title or a position or a role. Because I think it's going to be more useful. I think because if it's a title, role, or position, then maybe it's not a skill then, if it's a trait, then maybe it's not something you can learn. And I don't know that that's true. I don't know. So go ahead. Do you have a thought?
No, I'm just agreeing with you.
Good. That's a good thought. No, so does being named as a leader make someone truly a leader? Because that's a lot of how it happens in organizations is, we've elected our presidents, and then you'll have people from the opposite party go, oh, that person's not a leader. And it doesn't matter which party. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just, it's the rhetoric, and it's this kind of thing. Well, wait a minute though. They were elected. So how do you question their leadership then? So it calls to mind that, or in an organization where somebody is named as the vice president or the CEO or whatever, are we naming them leader, and is that the legitimizing process for leader? And what if there's not a leader named? And we see it all the time in like these adventure shows where there's a group of people stuck together, and it's like, you know, there's that little struggle for leadership, whether it's Lost, and, you know, that show where they're all, you know, I don't even know how to explain that show, or, you know, whatever. Or you see it happen in, you know, any of these reality TV shows where no one is given the formal status of being in charge. And so then you see people struggle for that. And it's a silent negotiation, and sometimes a not so silent negotiation. And it's just a very interesting thing. Or when we do bestow leadership upon somebody, what we're really bestowing on them authority. Right. And then we're going to get into some conversation about the difference between authority and leadership, because I think that that's one of the main problems with the confusion around leadership, is we've just sort of taken these two kind of similar concepts, leadership and authority, and we fused them together and we call it leadership, because we can't really call it authority because that's not a term we like. You know, you don't say, I'm the authority around here. We don't like people who say that. So leadership has more of the people vibe, and you know, it's way more noble, you know, to be a leader among people rather than being the authority. You know, 'cause if you even watch movies where there's a protagonist and an antagonist, a lot of times that antagonist is somebody in authority, and that protagonist is somebody who's being held up by the people and earning the respect of the people. And so we sort of have this thing, and we've just fused them together now when we talk about leadership, and we got to uncouple that. And that's one of the really, really important things, I think, in this introduction chapter, because if we can kind of like tease out authority as something separate, then we can really look at this thing called leadership in a new way, and in an interesting way. And I think that's going to be new to your participants. I think that exploration is going to be refreshing, hopefully, for them. Anyway.
You just made me think of the movie Braveheart.
Yeah.
Remember that movie?
Yeah.
So I forget the name of the main character.
Wallace.
Yes. Was clearly a leader.
Yeah.
And had great social force, but clearly had no authority.
No authority. And the people in England are like, wait a minute, who's this guy, William Wallace? And why is and they underestimate him for a while, and, you know, all of that. And I think that's great. You know, that story is that evolution of social force. Because I think he didn't even really want to be a leader. I think at first, and then there was this tragedy where with his wife, you know, they kill his love. Right. And anyway.
When he had the social force, people wanted to follow him. He had the passion that was clear about, and people were attracted to that passion and felt the need to follow. You're right. I don't think he was asking for the folks to follow him. Mm-hmm. Where on the other side of the fence, England, that was clearly authority, following through authority.
Yeah.
Because of authority.
Now, I think what would be interesting is, and I know you can't do this in your program, like have popcorn movie night. I don't know, why not? I mean, why couldn't you, the evening of your overnight retreat, you know, do a movie night, show this movie, and then talk about, like, did you see authenticity? Did you see purpose? Did you see advocacy? Did you see resilience? Did you see community building? Did you see reason? Did you see gratitude? And I think you'd see all of those in the movie, or any other. There's a lot of, like, you know, that's the first one you pick, you know, that came to mind for you. But it's kind of like we see it in all these great movies.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and what I love is I'm a big Matrix fan, not the second two, the first one, and it's the same kind of thing. And they actually talk about these things, like purpose is a very, very prominent theme in this movie, you know, and reason. And in the second movie, the Merovingian character talks about reason. So, you know, very, very interesting. These and that's the other thing, is nothing in positive leadership is like a fad or just this thing that's going to go out of style. These are timeless concepts. So if you have a participant say, well, I've heard all of this stuff before, they probably covered each of these topics. Like there's not going to be any new words that they've never heard of before. Maybe social forces, or maybe the way I talk about them is a little different. And actually that is what's different, is really connecting these two, leadership and social force. All right, I got to move on.
Yeah.
I mean, like, but you see right now, even in just in this conversation, we're having this richness coming out through exploring this, just you and I. And I think that that's possible within your participant group too, to have that. So then, is there a difference between authority and leadership? You could pose that question, let them debate it. Maybe somebody's going to say, absolutely not. They're one and the same. That'd be hard to defend, but you never know. It'd just be an interesting conversation. So I like to think of leadership, and I heard this from a woman I studied under, and I really liked it. She said, leadership is a moment of accountability. Her name is Marcia Schenk, and she's an anthropologist who then applies anthropology in the business world. And so she said that, and it stuck with me all these years. Leadership is a moment of accountability. I'm like, what a different way to think about leadership, as a moment. And a moment, could be an instant. That's how we think of a moment, like a short instant or a conversation. But a moment could also happen over a protracted period of time, a longer moment. But whatever the case is, in that moment, you feel a sense of accountability. And most of the time when that's happened to us, and we could think of times in our lives where we just felt accountable for something, most of the time we didn't consciously select it. We didn't consciously choose to be accountable. And the times where there were things that we were probably in charge of, but we didn't feel that sense of accountability, and we didn't really put our all into it. So there is that sense of accountability as this moment where you're invested. And I think that that's a really cool way of thinking about leadership. And the other thing I like about it is, in one moment, I could be exerting that accountability and that social force, but maybe in the next moment, you also are accountable and you're contributing your social force to it. And who is the leader then, you or me? Or is it just kind of this very fluid thing? And that's where I really want people to start to think of leadership as a much more fluid and dynamic thing, as opposed to a very fixed and permanent thing, which is what traits are. Traits are meant to be sort of relatively fixed aspects of your personality, or a role or position, which is, you're in that role and you have that title and nobody else has that title, so it's fixed.
So I have a question to clarify if there is a difference between accountability and social force. Mm-hmm. So I kind of think of that accountability as the passion, the draw that brings you there, just I think as you just said.
Yeah.
And I see social force as, once you're in action, it's that something that happens that is drawing others to the cause.
I love that.
Am I understanding that correctly, or?
Yeah, you are.
Or no?
No, I think so. I really think that accountability is the beginning of social force. I mean, it starts
the draw. It's the spark.
Yes. Yeah. Because what's happening in that moment, you're accountable for something. This isn't right. I got to take a stand, or, okay, I got to make this happen. Nobody else is going to make this happen. It starts with a mindset. No one experiences that but you. You don't even know you're having that kind of investment and accountability going on. You're just taken over by it. And then when you move, other people feel it. And that's where the social force kicks in. Social implies other people. It involves other people. Right. And accountability is a solo sport. I mean, if you've ever tried to make someone else accountable for something and how difficult it is, you can't make them. You might be able to inspire them. You might be able to, help, evoke that accountability, but you cannot make someone be accountable. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So I think that's a great point, and could be a really exciting point that could come out in the conversation. And I hope that people make the kind of connections you're making with it. And to varying degrees in your class, you'll see some people will really gravitate toward this, and some people will be very neutral. And you got to win them over, over time. But, and then you won't have too many people who are really resistant to this idea, even though I spent all that time up front talking about them. but you may encounter some of those people.
Well, and I think it's important, and maybe this is something I'll emphasize in my own slides, to kind of discuss the difference between that moment of accountability, which I love that example, and then the social force, the spark, and then the fire, or the, what gets you going in the action with others, and that kind of moves into the 7 competencies. As I'm understanding the positive leadership framework, the more you hone and strengthen those competencies, the stronger of your social force. So someone may have that moment of accountability, the spark, the drive, the passion, but may not have the capacity to actually create the social force.
That's exactly right.
It's almost like there's this road between the accountability, the social force, and you need the competencies to get you there.
Yes. That's exactly right. And I mean, you can use the word competency. I think of them as capacities, and it's.
Oh, I'm sorry, capacity.
No, it's fine.
Wrong C word. Sorry.
Yeah, they're so close. But there's a competency is more of like, maybe a skill or something, like a regimen that you do.
Sure.
Whereas the capacity is just, yeah. And so we all have the capacity to be authentic. We all have the capacity to identify purpose and to articulate purpose.
Right.
And you're exactly right that those amplify your social force, because I could feel that moment of accountability and I could get into action and have it totally fizzle out. And it's happened to me, and I give examples, sometimes funny, socially awkward examples of me trying to exert social force and not being effective.
I think that happens to a lot of leaders.
Yeah.
I think we have so many good intentions. I know in the nonprofit world, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
There's there's the cause, and we just can't rally the troops.
That's right. Yeah.
I think that's very common for that to happen.
And I think too that these 7 capacities would make for a great diagnostic of when your social force fizzles out, when it doesn't grab other people. Like maybe you weren't being authentic. I could think about times where, I was being totally inauthentic. I didn't really have a clear purpose, and I didn't articulate, or I did, but I didn't share that purpose in a compelling way, which then gets into the advocacy piece. I didn't advocate for this effectively, or the resilience piece. Like, there was a hiccup and I didn't respond well to it. Or community, I wasn't really thinking about involving other people. I made it more about me. Or reason, I didn't really see reality as it really was, and I misread things, and I had a warped view of the situation, and that's why it fizzled out. Or gratitude, I failed to express and include, the contribution of others. So, it almost becomes, and you can almost look at it and learn from that. So it becomes a great diagnostic. And it also becomes a great planning tool for when you do want to make something happen, for having like a little checklist of ways to make sure that your accountability, your good intentions, your social force, lands stronger with others. And that's why, if you have authority, you may not have to worry about those things. If you have authority, it's like, well, do this because I have punishments awaiting you, or rewards that I can lavish upon you. And then you have to do it.
Right.
But if you don't have that formal authority, what are you going to do? And in community leadership, most of the time we don't have that formal authority. So I talk about leadership as, or the essence of positive leadership. And I use the word essence instead of definition of positive leadership. When you get into a definition, I think it's so, it raises the possibility for debate. And I just really want to get something more of like, what is at the essence of leadership? And I remember the moment where I thought of this as I was thinking about that game, Follow the Leader, where you play as kids. And one kid does something, and then everybody else responds. And they imitate that person. And they walk where they walk, or walk how they walk, or do whatever. And so I was thinking, that's really, if we just strip down leadership, because people add on all this stuff onto leadership and these fancy terms and all this. So if we stripped it back down to the essence, it's when I do something and it causes you to respond. You know, you responded to me. And so therefore what I did was the act of leadership. And then, you know, now I might do something negative and you respond negatively. And I didn't want to get into that whole business. So I really wanted to focus us on positive actions, things forward moving. And I talk about this and what I mean by positive, because I think a lot of people hear that and they're like, oh, this is all touchy-feely and feel good and warm and fuzzy and kumbaya and all these words they have to be negative about positivity, you know? And I'm kind of that way too. I'm not really the sentimental type and I don't know, woo-woo type of personality. So, and I don't mean positive in that sense. I mean positive in almost like a mathematical sense. You have positive numbers, you know, that add value, aggregate value, increase value. And that's what I mean by the positivity, that it's more in a mathematical sense, you know, and creating greater value. And we'll talk about value in this at some point. Maybe not, because at the rate we're going, you know, we'll use up all our time. So
might be part 2.
Yeah, we might have to do a part 2. I don't know. I always underestimate the amount of time that I could talk, you know. So positive leadership is when you identify a need and you decide on the best course of action to address that need. And then even somewhere in here is that moment of accountability spark. I could almost like put that in here somewhere. And then others respond to your action in ways that are similarly forward-moving. Mm-hmm. So positive doesn't always have to feel good. In fact, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you need to have that confrontation for you to move forward. Sometimes you need to fire somebody, you know, or have a breakup so you can move on in your life. I mean, sometimes the most positive thing doesn't feel positive. But it's the correct action to unlock value, to move things forward. And in leadership, there's all kinds of things where you have to make very difficult decisions. I just learn more and more things aren't black and white, you know, and that the way I see things, and how could anybody see it differently, yet they see it very differently and legitimately. So, you know, it's not always clear cut, but you do the best you can. You make the best decision you can. So that's really it. That's kind of what I mean by positive leadership. It's not concerned with any of those things, status, title, ego. Ego is huge thing that comes into leadership. And we really have to manage that. Another topic for another day. There's a lot to be said about ego energy and when it's productive and when it's not. And so, you know, if you had people in a group, and I've done this exercise where they would define leadership, they're going to add things like visionary, or charismatic, you know, they're going to add those things, but I can find somebody that is an effective leader that they're not visionary, or somebody who's not very charismatic at all, but is an effective leader. So that's that shifting sand of everybody having different kind of views of leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to get away from that trait. Those are all traits, for example. I want to get away from trait theory when it comes to leadership. So here's where I talk about leadership being different from authority. And I have this image where they're together and overlapping and it's blurry. And then you kind of separate them and it becomes more clear. And so that's really what I'm trying to do. And what I hope that you're doing in your program is, and this isn't to say authority is bad, because I don't think so at all. I think it's a value neutral thing. Some people use authority very, very well and responsibly and ethically, and it's great. And then, of course, some people just don't know what to do with authority or how to use it, and they mess things up. And so I really wish that people would study authority as its own thing. Like, I wish there was a training on how to use your authority, because I think in the workplace where there are hierarchical structures, we would get rid of a lot of drama if we did that. You know, a lot of problems would be taken care of. So that's a discussion in there. That could be a huge discussion and a rich discussion for people. So this is another thing that I think is really important, is the distinction between obligatory effort and discretionary effort. And this kind of gets to that accountability conversation. So the idea here is there's certain things you're obligated to do. As a director of your leadership program, there's obligations. As a yoga instructor, you have certain obligations. You have to do it whether you feel like it or not. Okay, we all know that experience. And if we don't do that, then there's consequences. Or if we do it well, there's positive consequences. But then there's this thing, discretionary effort. And when I talk to my students, high school students about this, I say, when you're writing a paper and you're just like, let me just get it done. Let me do the bare minimum to get the grade. But then maybe there's a paper, a book review, and you really love the book, and you really went above and beyond. Like you didn't have to do all this extra work, but you wanted to. That's discretionary effort. And the idea is that, in any job, for example, there's my obligatory effort. I'm obligated to do this much work. If I do it, then you can't fire me really for just cause. You can't complain. I'm doing my job. But then there's that other effort that I have. I have it in reserve. I could do it. I could go that above and beyond. And that's the discretionary effort. Why? Because I have choice over whether to give you that effort. You ever think about somebody, you're like, well, I'm not going to do more for that person than I have to. Like we all had that experience. And so we won't give more than that. But then there's that above and beyond where you really are, various reasons. You're loyal to that person. That person did something right by you and you want to give them something back. You have a lot of pride in that work that you're doing, and you just really want to you love what you do, and you just go above and beyond. The point is that, here are the definitions for it. But the idea is that authority the best it can do is really get you to do your obligatory effort. But it's leadership that has the potential, and that's important. Leadership can't make people give their discretionary effort, but it has the potential, whereas I don't think authority does. And I think that's an important distinction, and one that I don't know. I haven't heard any feedback on this, so let me just get your thoughts on that.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question, but as you were describing the difference between obligatory efforts and discretionary efforts, and then I kind of glanced down at why it matters to leadership, I immediately thought of, in our area, we have an issue with board leadership, board governance.
Right.
First of all, we have a gap in effective board members, but we also have the same group of leaders who sit on like 10 boards. And then you look at these organizations and many of them are not effective, and it can come. So I just thought of how, as some of these leaders, it's an obligatory effort that they're sitting on all of these boards. It's not coming from that place of true, I'm guessing here, right? I've never had a discussion with any of these people one-on-one, but it's not coming from that discretionary place. It's not coming from that place of true passion and wanting to be a true leader for these causes. So that was just an example that came to my mind, that I think makes sense in our region here, that I could use to kind of describe those two terms. And I think it would resonate with our group a bit. I didn't answer your question at all, but that's just something that came to mind when you were talking about these two different terms.
No, you answered it better than I even hoped, because what you're describing, I think everybody watching this can relate to that. This is a universal experience on boards as far as I'm concerned, is that, most of the time you'll get asked to be on a board and you don't want to decline. And that's why people are on boards. And so,
people don't decline because they think, well, it's also going to make me, it will strengthen my leadership, right? Mm-hmm. Or my status, right? Mm-hmm. So it goes back to that leadership versus mm-hmm. status and authority and all of that, right? Mm-hmm. So it looks good on paper for me to be on all these boards, right? Yes. But sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's right on. And so then, like you said, then you see the results of that on a board. You see a disengaged board, or just an obligatorily involved board, versus that board that really is passionate about it. And I think one of the best things a nonprofit can do is really kind of like you know, do an audit of the board member engagement, because, you know, when you have an engaged board, even if it's a smaller board, a lot more is possible, because the disengaged people dampen the enthusiasm of the engaged people. So I'd rather have like a few warm coals and gather them together than have a bunch of coals and rocks and all this stuff and gather them together. I think I would build a much better fire for my nonprofit or my cause. And I think that's just such a perfect way to relate this to community leadership. Is that level. And I think a lot of people in the room, your participants, will, if they were being honest, they'd all think of experiences where they were not engaged, they weren't giving their discretionary effort, they were just there out of obligation. They'll come to as many meetings as they have to before they get dismissed. They'll give the minimum amount when there's time for the fundraising. They'll volunteer for the very minimum, and if you don't ask them, then they're happy to not volunteer. And of course there's the opposite. Of course that's not all board members. You know, it's those people who are really engaged and excited, and they're giving their discretionary effort, that really make that nonprofit effective and exciting. So great connection, and a really good discussion here about, so yeah, if you're a manager and you're wanting people to really, you know, contribute more than their obligatory effort, then think about how how you're using your social force, and have you built community? Have you expressed gratitude? Are people viewing you as authentic? Is the purpose clear? I mean, again, those capacities come back into play.
Sure.
So, yeah, we can't control what people do, but we can create the conditions to trigger their discretionary effort. And that's kind of a leadership mentality versus an authority mentality.
Right.
So when I say social force, I want to make sure people like hear the word force, and they're like, I don't mean like taking by force and forcing somebody to do something. I mean more like a force in the physical sciences. You know, these are energies that are acting on physical bodies. And I think here's the definition from science. A force in science is a push or pull acting on an object as a result of its interaction with one another. And then let's just translate that to, from physical to social, because we're physical forces. You know, we can do physical force on each other and all that, but we're also social creatures. And so I think there's this kind of like, you know, and this gets into the world of the invisible, and it's not as physically scientific, it's socially scientific, that we're social bodies. And so leadership is the process by which one person influences others by taking actions that evoke reactions. You know, it's a social form of that push or pull acting on a social object, which we are, you know. And so, yeah, so here, leadership is a process by which one person influences others by taking positive. I think that's a repeat.
Yeah.
So that's the point I'm trying to make here when I talk about social force. And we do influence each other. And it's really interesting. If you ever could just observe somebody in a bad mood in a room, like let's say you're in a waiting room or somewhere, and somebody's in a bad mood, just watch the mood of the others around them. It's almost impossible for anybody else to be in a good mood. You know, like somebody's fidgeting and they're huffing and they're sighing and they're, and then everybody else is just kind of like, yeah, I'm in a bad mood now too, or they're just not in a good mood. You know, and you see that we affect each other socially. It's just what happens. And here I'm encouraging people to be more mindful now about how we socially impact other people around us and how it can be used as a force for good in our communities. That's my purpose for this whole thing. That's what I'm after here. And I want your participants to learn about it, but first we have to get them to kind of like, you know, we have to kind of, you know, scrape away some other ideas and notions they have about leadership to get there. But like that's what I envision. If we can get people to really understand the power they have to make things happen in the world positively, that's my dream. That's kind of, you know, what this is all about for me. So 5 key points about social force. I'm going to try to like really speed up and be done here in like 5 or 10 minutes.
I'm just going to step away for a moment.
I'm going to keep going. And so you can watch this on video later. So 5 key points of social force. 1, whenever people come together, there's an ability to influence each other that wasn't there before. And that's basically the social part of it. Leadership doesn't happen in a vacuum. Leadership doesn't happen if you're alone on an island. And I say this a lot, so I'm going to say it again. There's no such thing as self-leadership. There's people who talk about that and maybe books about it, or it's a thing or a concept. But to me, it's just one more example of where we have leadership. We're using it in ways that just kind of make it more complicated and all of that. You don't lead yourself. I prefer to call that thinking. That's that thing there. So in order for leadership to take place, in order for the potential for it to be there, it has to happen in a social setting. All right. So another point about social force is that it's merely potential. Like, I have potential social force, but if I don't channel it correctly, it's wasted social force. It just will fizzle out. And so there's ways to make your social force more refined and have greater impact. So welcome back.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah, so number 3, the third point I want to make about social force is that there's different levels of effectiveness, kind of leading from the point number 2. So you could be inept at social force, clueless about it, or you could be really masterful about it. And some people just really know how to be compelling and how to engage people. And if you ever meet those people, you should watch, you should observe and learn from what they do. There's some people that are just manipulative and shady, and I'm not talking about those people. I don't consider that leadership. Like, if you produce bad results and bad vibes and negative consequences in a community, even if you're very influential and charismatic and all this stuff, I don't consider you a positive leader. That's... You could be a good person and still not be a positive leader because the results you're producing are negative.
Right.
Yeah. So I believe that all of us can learn to channel social force with greater potency. That's the basis here of the whole thing, is that if you're mindful about it, if you're thoughtful about it, if you are putting yourself in the right circumstances where you're a natural fit to be a leader, to exert social force, then that's what I want for people. I want people to understand, there's some environments, no matter what I do, I am not going to really maximize my potency in social force. There's just some people I will never be credible in front of. And I need to understand that. And I also need to understand that there's times and there's frames of mind that I get into where I'm less effective. There's times that I'll just assume something and I'll be totally wrong and I'll be less effective. And I've learned practices like really listening and understanding and being sensitive to the social world around you can make you more effective. That's why I often say listening can be more influential than speaking. And that's counterintuitive at first, but when you really understand what I mean by listening, that allows you to really apply your energies in a much more socially potent way. And then there's factors that enhance or diminish social force. I've kind of been talking about that a little bit, but here what I'm talking about specifically on this point is the 7 capacities. That those are the factors that can enhance your social force. I talked about this already. When I defined the word positive, I don't mean it's about feelings, that I think about it in a mathematical sense, and that, yes. So, and here I introduced the term operator versus technician. And what I mean by that is basically with cars and computers, people understand this. Unless you're a computer expert, you're just an operator. If your computer breaks down, you have a very limited set of moves you could do. There's a lot of discussion to actually be had about operator versus technician and what makes them different. And a technician understands the dynamics that govern the computer, the software, the hardware. And so they have a wider range of moves they can make to get the positive results they need. When my car breaks down, I'm an operator. I can turn the key. That's about it. If it doesn't turn over or work, then I don't know what to do. I'm an operator. And operator behavior is I'm frustrated. I have very limited range of moves I could use to get the result I want. And basically, I'm not as capable to produce positive results. So then I just want to walk this over to leadership. You know, I talk about cars and computers, an operator versus a technician. So when it comes to leadership, are most people operators or technicians? And there's really, like, some people might say technicians, but really, I think most people who are supposed to be leaders are really operators. And you see operator behavior all the time. If they don't get the results they want, they just yell it louder. You know, exaggerated movements are a key indicator of an operator. You know, I'm going to exaggerate. I'm going to shake my computer. I'm going to headbutt the dashboard on my car. You know, I'm going to curse and yell and scream. Or if I'm not getting my way with somebody, I'll yell and I resort to name calling and negativity. You know that I am an operator. A technician says, okay, this pathway to getting the result I want is not available to me. What are other pathways? You know, they adjust themselves instead of demanding that their environment adjust to them. That's technician mentality of leadership. And I know that there's people who aren't going to like these words. I know it's not going to. If there are better words, I'm open to it. I've entertained some other things that I didn't think were improvements, but this is what I mean by operator versus technician. Any thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of other terms, no, but because I think those are great terms.
Yeah.
But I think about, and again, this is sort of a generalization, but when I think of the operators that I've experienced in my life, those are those folks that think leadership is authority. More so than not, right? They're usually those people who use their authority to get things done. And that's what sort of I thought of when I think of the operator versus the technician.
That's great. And we talked about that activity, like the best leader or manager you've ever had and the worst leader or manager you ever had. And you can almost just like have people at their tables, like create a list of the qualities of the best leader they've ever had and the qualities of the worst leader. And you would almost just see a clear example of operator versus technician right there. So that might be like a way to make this more discussionable.
Right.
And by the way, like the way I'm presenting this, I do not expect you or any of the other people using positive leadership to do a lecture like I'm doing right now. Right. I'm really just trying to kind of give you ammunition, give you some of the thoughts behind it so that you can feel more confident in discussing it. And if a little tidbit here or there that I'm using it helps you or gives you a way to express something, then that's the goal. So I do this little slide here, and I don't know if it's going to make sense to people, but the operator mindset is, you know, you're focused on the results. That's all you're caring about. How do I get the results? So operators, you know, they think about leadership as a position or role, as you said. They rely on a narrow range of moves to produce the results. They don't learn. They stop learning, and they just carry over behaviors from on, you know. In other words, they justify their already known way of doing things rather than adjust themselves to grow and learn in new ways. So I'll justify that you're just not being cooperative. You're just a bad employee. You're just not listening. You just don't want to do your job, rather than say, wait a minute, I've failed to produce the positive result I want. What adjustment do I need to make to get that result? And during normal conditions, everything's fine. There's no problem with your sucky manager or whatever. They're fine. But it's when there's abnormal conditions that come up that they freak out or whatever. So that's a hallmark. When my car's working fine, I'm great. You can't tell if I'm an operator or a technician. I'm just driving my car. It's when it breaks down, when there's abnormal conditions, that's when my operatorness becomes apparent. So let's see. So transitioning to the technician mindset, and here's a little different. So in the last image, the person was all the way here on the right. They're all the way on focusing on what are the results. But here, moving more toward a technician, you're thinking about what are the reactions I want? What's the desired reaction I want? And will that produce the results? So you're moving from operator mentality toward technician mentality. And where it really becomes clear is now you're thinking over here on this left side. The technician says, okay, what actions can I take to get to produce the desired reaction that will get the result? So it's a formula. Basically, it's like if you're dissatisfied with a relationship with somebody, the first thing I want you to do is say, well, what is the result that I want? So yes, start there. What would I like to have happen? So let's take that cantankerous participant, that obstinate participant who seems argumentative and like a know-it-all. So you think, well, what is the result I want? Well, I don't want the person, I can't change the person to be like, I'm not trying to get them to think the way I think. I just want them to be less disruptive in the class. And I want them to become more aware of the impact they're having on the class. And I want them to know that I want that behavior to stop or change. That's the result I want. Okay. So in order for him to do that, what is the reaction you need from him? You need for him to not be defensive, to not feel attacked. So if I just called him out in the middle of the group and said, wow, aren't you the smartest person in the room? Are you always this way? Is that going to get the desired results? No, it's not. It's going to produce a very negative reaction. And it's also going to shut down everybody else in the room too, make them afraid of being called out. So what can I do? Well, I should ask to speak to the person. So if I want his reaction to be more aware and more cooperative, and that'll get me the result I want, then what actions should I take that would get that desired reaction from him? And that's where I start to say, okay, yeah, I need to not lose my cool. I need to not make him feel attacked. I need to maybe talk about it in private. I need to couch it in a way that he can understand where I'm coming from, that it's not personal. And so I think we could do that with anything. Oh, I want to start a movement in my community. The results I want are this. So yeah, think about the results. But then, okay, well, what are the reactions I want from the people around me to get those results? All right, then what actions must I take to evoke those reactions? And so I think it becomes like a tool that you could use to actually be more mindful about your leadership, your exertion of social force. And some characteristics of technicians, let me just lay them out here and you could read them. You could hit pause and read them. So pause now if you want to read them because I got to move on. Basically this is when I do a preview of all the chapters. And I can maybe say a few words about each of these capacities if I wanted. You could ask people what the words mean. You could just say, here's what we're going to be talking about over the course of the year. And they're going to, some of these will be your favorites. And the others will be someone else's favorites. And that's fine. But the idea here is that we're going to explore how each of these relates to leadership and increases your social force. So also, this is a little diagram where I relate, the capacity to a certain quality of the social force. So what does authenticity do? Well, it's where social force originates within you. Purpose is about the direction you're trying to channel that social force. Advocacy is about the intensity level of that social force and how compelling you could be with it. Resilience is how well you respond to change and feedback. So it's that I guess resilient quality of social force. It's the some things like if you took a paper clip and you bent it, it would stay bent. And if you did it a couple times, it would break. Aluminum is not very resilient. Whereas if I had a titanium stick of the same width of a paper clip, I could do this thousands and thousands of times. It'll always return to its original form. And so titanium is much, much more resilient. That's the quality, the ability to return to your original form after concussion or impact or negative experience. how quickly can you return to your resting heart rate after doing physical exertion? That's, how quickly can you get back onto your focus as a leader if you've received negative feedback or someone criticized you or there was a failure, something that you really wanted to be successful? How quickly can you return to your original form? Community building is how to multiply social force, replicate it in others. Reason is how, to what degree is your social force pure and free from distortions, free from inaccuracies, free from illusion or whatever. And then gratitude is how social force is perpetuated and, gain momentum. So, just some thoughts there. And that's kind of the conclusion. So I thought maybe we can return a little bit to a little like conversation about your sense of readiness for your, for your program and any questions you have regarding.
Well, I think after this, like I said, I'm familiar with the framework because I've been looking into it. But I think after this discussion, I have a better sense of the key concepts that I need to expose the class to, and how I'll go about doing it with my own personal examples. But I think there's so many ways you can, because for me, I feel like it's important, particularly with adult learners, that you're getting them engaged in discussion or an activity. You're not just lecturing, as you said. And I think there's so many ways with this framework that you can do that. You can plant the seed of the concept and then create that activity or discussion. So for me, I'm just trying to figure out which ones I want to use, really, which activities, and I know that the field guide provides so many examples of ways you can take these concepts and then make them real with your group. So that's where I'm at, is just trying to kind of pick and choose from the vast menu of examples in a way that fits for my group.
Yes. Good. Yeah. And so I think kind of closing on a couple of key points, and some that you brought up that I want to just emphasize, is really, really keeping in mind those adult learning concepts that they don't need to be lectured to. They have all this experience. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to give them an idea or concept that they can attach to their experience,
right,
and discuss with each other. And so avoiding lecture is really a key part, and having a facilitative mindset, which is really one of the things I like about our conversations is you really do think about, how can I facilitate this? And yes, there should be a little struggle. You should feel a little struggle in trying to figure out and tease out how you want to go about it. That's the creative process. And I'm resistant to just prescribing to people, do this. Maybe some people want me to do that. But I want to give ideas, and I will always be here to be a resource if anybody wants to talk to me one-on-one, which is kind of how these whole conversations came about, is when you reached out, Jennifer. But I don't want to be prescriptive in it, because I don't think that's I don't want there to be a prescriptive mindset around positive leadership, because that's not leadership then. It's following. If I say, do it this way, and then you do it this way. So I want you to think about how you want your participants to relate to the material. The other thing is that the more engaging you make it, the more people will read it. The more you're trying to force people to read it, the less they're going to read it. And you'll almost feel that momentum kind of up and down. And sometimes it's not even because of anything you did. Sometimes you just get a class that is just lazy, and then other times you get like this amazing class and you're like, I love them and I wish every class was like that. And sometimes it's not your fault, but it's a great laboratory for you to apply these principles of positive leadership. If you're like, what result do I want? How can I get my participants to react in a way that will produce that result? Right. Then what must I do or not do or do differently to try to get that result.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so I hope for you and for the other people, as it has for me, that this curriculum becomes your own leadership journey. And if you even just did that, if you were just going to be like, I'm going selfish mode and I'm just going to treat this like, how can I get the most out of this for myself? Then I think the rest of it's just going to flow from there. I think if you share, you engage the material that way as if it's your own personal leadership journey, then I think that's just going to be one of the most important critical success factors. So
I've actually, and I don't know if that's actually sort of the mindset that I have with the whole book, and as the facilitator of this going into my program, tell me if you think this is a good idea or not. But I'm very familiar with all of the capacities, but I have not read anything but the summaries on each one of those chapters, because I kind of wanted to read in depth with the group as we were going along. And what do you think of that approach? Or do you feel like, no, you should really just read it in depth before and be completely versed and ready? I don't know.
Well, okay, a couple of things on that. One, if it were me saying what you just said, I would know that I was just being lazy, because that's me. That's my thinking. But it's you saying that.
I didn't think of it that way, really.
Well, and that's the point I'm trying to make, because people watching this are going to be like, oh my God, did he just totally insult her? No, I'm saying you're a better person than me, because I believe you really mean that. I really believe that you're trying to preserve sort of that like beginner mindset and experience that with your participants. And so I think that would be a great way to go, because you mean it. Whereas for me,
I think because, and I'm very, my thinking is that I will be doing my own work each month, right, as the facilitator and planning of this. And part of that work is making it real for myself. Mm-hmm. So, that would mean reading the chapter and doing some examples in the field guide, and so that I can come to that program prepared to share my experience.
And that's what I think would really play well, is you could say, guys, look, I'm experiencing this with you for the first time. And that your enthusiasm and your questions kind of make you a co-learner with your participants. I think that would engage them more, because they'll want to be like, oh, let me help Jennifer in her journey, or, let me partner with her. I think that's great. And of course you can't replicate that the next year.
No.
But that leads me to the next point, is that next time you go through this, you're going to see aspects and connections that you didn't see this time around. It's kind of like when you watch a movie the first time and you're like, oh, that was so good, I want to watch it again. And then you watch it again and you're able, because you know the general plot now, you're able to focus on other things and other interactions, things that you didn't see before.
Right.
And that's going to happen. I've had people tell me that with this curriculum, with these materials. And so a lot of it is just, that's the nature of life. You walk into a room a second time, you see things you didn't notice before. But the other thing is that my writing style is very dense. And so I pack a lot in that might not connect or be apparent the first time around. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's just a feature. So I think you're going to see that happen. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So good. I think this has been a great start. I hope that people watching this will find this as thought-provoking and valuable and provide clarity. And I invite people to maybe comment, because I'll put this up on YouTube, and so maybe other people end up watching it who aren't in the community leadership movement, but most people, I don't know why anybody would if they weren't. So, if you want to make comments here or ask questions or email them to me, that's great. But I really think your mindset's right on to go into this with a learning mindset and a growth mindset, an adult learning mindset. So I think it's going to be great. And we'll come back again. Maybe we'll spend a couple minutes seeing how the introduction went, and then we'll talk about authenticity and prepare you for the next leg of that journey. So great. Good?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. So
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.